bit about me. I've spent a lot of time trying to be fairly good in information security through the years. It's probably been a bit too long, but hopefully I can add value to this. I'm going to try and mediate a conversation around aligning business objectives with the cybersecurity world with regards to a number of different areas, investment, business, outcome, and the role that InfoSec should play. And this is a topic which is actually fairly close to my heart, because I think sometimes our industry doesn't get this right. So can be controversial, and I think I want to welcome any sort of feedback or input under that sort of basis, if you like. I have a bunch of questions here, so please excuse me whilst I'm looking down. And these are just meant to be sort of starters, but I think we should invite the panelists to come up now at this point and introduce themselves, if that's okay. So I think let's go left to right. Sorry.
Who's left?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my left. Sorry. Good point. Yes, please.
So I'm Barbara Aung. I am CISO for Virgin Media O2. I've been with O2 and now Virgin Media O2 for the past 20 years in various security roles, starting more in a security operational, security engineering role, security architecture roles, and then going into more of a compliance, and now into a CISO role focusing on information security and really about our attack surface, understanding it, managing it, ensuring that whatever comes into the business is the risks are known, risks are understood. So
this is an area I want to come back to, because I know your background is quite sort of vast. So lots of value to add, I think. Andy?
Yep, so I'm Andy Piper. I'm the CISO for the investment bank at Barclays. So that's everything from banking, markets, research, wholesale lending, that side of the business. I started my career in consulting, so I used to work for Deloitte. I did about 8 or 9 years of that.
Same judging, by the way.
And then did what a lot of people do, gradually went native at one of my clients and stayed, and I thought I'd do a couple of years on the other side to see what that's like. And 14 years later, I'm still working for Barclays. I've done a bunch of different jobs when I'm there, not done the same job for 14 years. But always around technology, risk, control, governance, compliance, and then obviously more recently in security, and that's what took me into the role of CISO.
And Ash and Hugh, you're sat in the wrong places, but let's go with Ash.
Yeah, so yeah, Ashley Venn, Head of Information Security at Recognised Bank, have been there since December 2020. We're a small SME challenger bank. When I joined, we didn't have a banking licence, and I was the first recruit into security, so building out that strategy and that map and the security controls for the bank in order to get our licence. I've been in security for 11 years, and for my sins, I started my career under James, actually, at the Ombudsman, so we go back quite a few years, and that was kind of in security operations capacity, and then moved across into an insurance broker heading up the GRC element of it.
So following on from Ash, Hugh, let's get a bit of story.
Hi, Hugh Gilmour. I'm the CISO for Aptia Group. Aptia was only formed last year. It started trading this year, but Aptia was formed through the purchase of the pensions administration business from Mercer in the UK and the benefits administration in the US. So although the business is new, it started with lots of clients, lots of members, lots of personal data, and lots of applications that are not all new. I've only actually been in cyber for, relatively a few years, only 6 or 7, I think, directly. But my background is risk management, so that was what I did at university many years ago. And I've always used that throughout my career from various roles, whether they're operational, security, or commercial even as well. But risk management, stakeholder engagement have been key themes throughout my career.
Which is fairly common.
Which I think relevant to this.
Yeah. And sorry, by the way, if you look at me rocking, it's because I've got a bit of a gammy leg and some knees that have seen a few years of running. So I have to sort of keep.
Was that rowing last night, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, yeah. Right, so what I want to start with is defining what successful security means. And this is a controversial subject for myself because I think it's often in conflict with what successful business actually means. And we can move on to this a bit later. But I think, can I ask a question of yourselves as to where you think possible conflict might exist with that?
I mean, I'm happy to go first. So the first part around successful security, I think the default position is probably not having a breach or not having an incident, whereas actually I view it more as having minimal user impact or zero user impact and supporting the business objectives. So for me, the not breach part is almost like the hygiene factor or dealing with something if it happens.
Yeah.
But I think framing it more around that supporting the business objectives and the business goals. And for the user, if you want any security to be successful, you have to make the user journey and experience positive. If it's seen as a barrier, you're hiding to nothing.
Yeah.
But I think so many people still talk about successful security as breaches or vulnerabilities or incidents,
Yeah.
and I just don't think that works.
So I've completely gone off schedule already on this list here. So from my point of view, I've always had a challenge with appropriate risk management, as in risk identification, risk ownership, and associated sort of controls with regards to actually supporting business, as in different industries have different requirements. As opposed to just having a flat approach. Have we between us and everyone else, by the way, sort of experienced that, I suppose?
I think, building on what Hugh said, obviously I work for investment bankers and they are quite a challenging bunch. They like to be very quick to market because that's how they make money, and they don't like anything that gives even the slightest indication of friction to their day. So for me, it is a question of balancing where I put control, but still allowing the bank to function. I could run the most secure bank in the world, but no one would ever want to do business with it. So it's where do you draw that line? And then I think, again, taking on what's the right thing to measure it on is not being breached the right thing. I'm sort of increasingly driving the boards that I talk to say, we're going to get compromised. It's inevitable, right? There's so many people who are attacking us. There's so many capable threat actors. It's a question of when, not if. And actually then success is how do I respond and recover? So if I'm looking at sort of, your NIST things, we're moving identify, detect, yes, but protect, respond, recover is really where we've got to be very good in, particularly in the financial services industry. So it's driving the guys who are not techies, not cyber people, to understand that and to really get why we're putting these controls in place that you perceive as friction and where the value is.
And do you think there's appropriate acknowledgement of the different industry bodies and regulatory bodies?
I mean, there's no choice in my world, right?
This might be one for you, actually.
We're so regulated.
Because I know from my perspective, I just see, combativeness between regulatory and industry bodies. Or am I talking rubbish? I'm happy to be talking rubbish, by the way.
I think from a regulatory point of view, it actually helps to have some regulation. I think from the telco industry, you have Ofcom, you have the regulation before, but that has really been strengthened with the Telecom Security Act, which really allows us to drive some good security. And what maybe in the banking world is seen as de facto standard, it really allows us to uplift this, and it helps tell the story to the why. Because I think when we go back to the previous question, it's more about enabling the business, helping the business achieve these objectives and telling your story as to helping them to come to the conclusion what is acceptable risk, what works for the business to allow them to be successful, but also manages the risk they have. And then, as Andy says, it's about recovering, being in a position to identify when you're being breached, and then being able to contain that breach and recover as quickly with minimal business impact. So I think business continuity is a big, important topic as well here.
and planning for that. Ash?
Yeah, no, I would just go on to that. I think, so working in banking as well, under the same regulations, and the UK finance sector has probably been one of the most regulated industries since time. And as a result, it's a very risk-adverse industry, but the reality is with the way that we're operating today and having to keep up and innovate, that we need to change that approach. And that's where security and the risk controls come in to be able to facilitate that evolution into the next step. Actually, I'm going to point to Gar. So Gar, I met Gar actually when I first joined Recognise 4 or 5 years ago, and we had a chat, and my first kind of leadership, like senior leadership role in security. And I remember Gar, we had this chat, and he was like, Ash, your best friend is your risk register. And it's so right, and
That's
that
a bit cheesy.
it's cheesy, but actually
it
it was probably some of the best advice. And actually then I took a step back and was then able to just kind of do that analysis and that review, and actually what are our risks, and then delve deeper into that, and what is it that we want to achieve, and then aligning that to the bank's strategy.
So you're saying he taught you more than I did?
Yeah, not difficult.
And so, Bill, on that again, I think that the tension often comes between the risk-averse second-line functions, or the operational risk guys in financial terms, and the front office. Yep. So I sort of play a pivot point between that. You know, the regulators want this, and we're in, I think I was talking to someone last night about this, 40 different countries Barclays are in for investment banking,
Yep.
78 different regulators I've got to keep happy. And every one of them's got a slightly different flavour, so it's great to have that sort of big stick at the back to go, got to do it because the regulators say. But actually, it's not necessarily the CISO or the tech teams that are risk averse, it's our operational risk functions, our internal audit functions who are driving us to be, you know, a certain way, and it's not necessarily the way that the front office want to operate, so that's often a challenge.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think those regulations, while they all kind of align and want to achieve the same thing, that there is mismatches in it. One example is Singapore, and I know you operate out in Singapore, is that their data protection laws say that encrypted data is not PII, but GDPR states encrypted data is PII. So there are definitely mismatches in those. And I think with the regulations actually, and like we've got CBEST and CQuest coming in from a financial services, you've got DORA out in the EU, the Cyber Resilience Act that's just been published, I think, in the last few days. They're all tailored to certain industries, but actually, while they're great advancements and improvements with the regulations in trying to achieve, they're outdated as soon as they are published, because they've been so long in the making.
More conflicting.
GDPR was started to be spoken about in 2008, and then all of a sudden we've got Gen AI, and it's like, what does GDPR now mean for these elements of technology evolution?
So you completely ruined my flow of questions. So, however, I'll go with this. Okay, please excuse me. So, stakeholder engagement, management, identification. When you're talking multi-jurisdiction, how much of a challenge is that, and what's the ramifications of not getting it right, or even getting it right? To be honest, so if you're compliant in multi-jurisdictional data protection legislation, how easy is that, and how much from a risk point of view is that ignored?
I think you can take different approaches to it. Sorry, do you want to?
Well, UK based, so I think that's difficult.
So there's a danger of taking the most restrictive requirement from every jurisdiction and tying yourself in knots by having the most overly protected set of data ever. So it's a bit of a balance between working out what do you have to put in place, where you have to put it in place, and if you can ring fence it. So there are certain things that we do, so PCI, DSS, for example, the way that it's so for those of you who don't know it, it's quite a prescriptive standard. It says do it this way and only this way, even if you think you've got a better way, do it the way the standard says. And that's often not the way we want to work. So where we've got payment cards, we actually ring fence them into their own environment and put the DSS controls over that and not over somewhere else. So there's a lot of really sort of quite low level understanding required of what each standard needs you to do, and then you can apply it where you need to apply it.
So I'm going to interrupt, sorry, because I do this, by the way.
Go for it.
So I do apologise. Does that mean that there's risk exception that is possibly not compliant with the standards involved?
If it's regulatory, you have to comply where the regulator says you have to comply. So
And how do you prove that? Is that through audit?
Yeah, normally. So it can be self-attestations, it can be audits that the regulator can come in and review, and they do quite frequently. But it's, so if I take my DSS thing again, that's only about card data. So I only have to apply that where I've got credit card or customer card data. I don't have to apply it where I've got investment banking stuff. So we ring fence it based on what it is and what the regulators want you to do.
And my thoughts are, what is out of scope? Would that be ethically aligned to, say, PCI DSS?
No, I don't think so. I think if it's anything that would be classed as, in that case, card data, and there's a regulation that says you must protect it in a certain way, then you can't really go, oh, I'm not going to. Even if it's not commercially sensible, you still have to meet the basics of the regulation. Yep. There can be interpretation on what the regulation means and how to do it. And
who makes that interpretation? Out of interest. And I'm going to ask this to everyone. I don't know how I'm going to ask it to everyone. But do we feel it's appropriate from a CISO perspective?
I think that's when the audit comes in. Like, especially with PCI, that it's not subjective. It is what it is, and you've got your QSAs when it comes to PCI, so you've got that external validation. I know that there's different elements of assertion with PCI depending on the size of the organisation and the amount of cards you held. So I think you've got that QSA and that independent validation that ensures that.
And what challenges from a legacy tech perspective does that present? That's a personal question, by the way. I'm just
Yeah, no. So it's ironically, despite being a bank, we don't have to comply to PCI because we don't have current accounts. We don't have bank cards. We just have deposits, savings, and lending. So actually, we're out of scope for PCI, which is strange for a bank. And but
these are questioning eyes, by the way. I'm looking at you. Like.
Yeah, no, but quite fortunate on my side. But actually, in my previous organisation, we did need to become PCI. DSS certified and compliant because we, as an insurance broker, we were taking payment cards and we hadn't been PCI compliant despite us needing to be. And so actually we had call recordings with card data on it. And it's like, right, what do we do now? So actually for us, it was, we've got this data. So actually we need to now probably treat this a little bit differently. Let's implement a solution. So we put the DTMF solution in. So tapping on the tones back 5-6 years ago. And then what we did was with the call recordings that we had, we actually took them and we actually put them into an airlocked room and then put controls around that to ensure compliance.
That's quite a shift.
Yeah, it was a massive shift, but it was one that we needed to do.
So I think, sorry, I was just going to, my previous organisation, I had to comply with PCI DSS and the way we addressed it, one was keeping separate networks, I think is what Andy's kind of saying, keeping all the anything related to PCI in its own segregated network so we didn't bring the rest of the network into scope of PCI requirements. Yeah. And then moving to P2P, so it was encrypted end-to-end, which then de-scopes, if you look at the total requirements, doing end-to-end P2P reduces it significantly. And that actually justified the investment in P2P. There's lots of other good reasons why we should do it, but limiting the burden, if you like, of regulation against PCI was one of the reasons for the business to invest. Yeah. So again, there was a business decision rather than purely risk decision. We have to comply.
Knowing the granularity of this stuff, so really getting into the weeds of it in terms of what can I do to meet this requirement in the way that's going to allow my business to work as best as I can. So that, the encryption is a great example because by doing that one thing, you've taken a whole bunch of other stuff out of scope. Yeah. So it's really getting, and this is where I think having people who are regulation specialists or the techie side of it really come into it, because if you can't get into the weeds and you don't really understand what it is, that's where you'll get dragged off into some.
I think it's a good question, James asked around who makes that decision. So I've always been quite interested in not law, but just I like contracts for some bizarre reason. I quite like reading the way the contracts are structured, and regulatory frameworks again. Similarly, I'm able to read them and sort of interpret them. So I've always done that in my role. I've looked at any standards that apply to wherever we operate as a business. I've looked at those and then pulled out the bits that are relevant. And in most of the organisations I've worked in, we've developed our own control framework. So it's not purely NIST or purely something else. It's our own framework based on what we need. And then it's relatively straightforward for me to look at our framework and say, okay, in the UK, because of our client requirement, market requirement, we're 27001. I need to make sure that our control framework allows us to be compliant with 27001. In the US, typically the clients like NIST. There's some HIPAA, there's some NYDFS.
Yeah.
But now, I think more and more, there's a lot of standards coming out, which is good, because if you look at a lot of the breaches, it's still the basics that have allowed the breach to be successful.
Totally agree.
So now this is old stuff, this is out of date. People still aren't doing the basics, so as long as people aren't doing the basics, you should be mandating a minimum level. And if you look at most of the recent standards, there's a lot of commonality. It's things like encrypting, MFA, strong passwords, or passwordless.
And
it's common sense.
Yeah, well, exactly right. And is this still a standard sort of challenge in all your opinions with multi-jurisdictional data protection legislation, associated legislation, etc.?
It becomes harder, I think. I mean, I actually think GDPR was very helpful, not just from Europe, but lots of countries effectively adopted GDPR as their privacy standard, and there's lots of commonality. I think in the States it's quite challenging because it's state-driven, and they all seem to want to outdo the other each time they make it slightly more draconian. Don't touch biometrics in the States, effectively. So I think it becomes more difficult, but I wonder if, like with GDPR for privacy in Europe, we'll get to a point where there is a more regional standard rather than multiple industry standards, because there is so much commonality.
So on that point, and I don't like this question by the way, but I wrote it. How do you measure sort of multi-jurisdictional compliance, like KPIs, the metrics behind it, and do appropriate comparisons?
I think it's about having a good understanding of what there is out there, and then looking at how that can apply. Actually, we are a UK only entity, so we are only regulated under one regulation. But going back to the US, actually, NYDFS I think is a fantastic framework to measure by, and so I've had external audits conducted under NYDFS, and I remember the board going, "Why are we doing this? Like this is New York, we're London." But then when you actually look at what that framework is and the controls around that, it actually aligns to a lot of the regulations. So there are commonalities, I think. The problem is there are so many different ones out there. I know like ISO is very European, British, NIST is very American. Actually, Bank of England has now gone towards NIST. Like they measure us on NIST now, not ISO. So we are starting to see NIST become more and more, especially in the finance industry in the UK. But I think, will there ever be a global standardization? I don't think there will. But actually, the way that we're operating now, we're born in the cloud as a bank. Like we don't have any on-prem infrastructure, thankfully.
That'd be nice.
Yeah. But for us, our data is kind of everywhere and anywhere, and it's really interesting. I was looking at some analytics this week actually on our systems of shadow IT and actually just where we're touching. And like we're in Taiwan, we're in Australia. Like it's mad, and it's like that is the modern day. But actually, how do we ensure compliance with everything? And I think the answer is you can't.
So from
ensure
policy
it,
framework
100%.
Perspective,
But we very deliberately don't, right? So our approach is there are so many different regulators who want so many different things.
Say that.
This is what we're going to do.
Yep.
And then we will explain to the regulators why what we do is adequate to meet their regulation. So I don't have different KPIs in different regions. I don't have different targets. I have, this is the bank's risk appetite, this is what we're going to do, and it does meet the requirement. And if the regulator comes in and asks us, Part 500 is bane of my life in New York, they will come in quite regularly and ask you, right, okay, we're going to do an exam, we're going to prove to me why you meet our regulation. And it's a question of taking what you do and showing them why. So it aligns to NIST, but if it aligns to NIST, it also maps to ISO 20001, it also maps to Part 500 and everything else. So my preferred approach, as I say, is to not try and do anything for any one regulator and have an approach for the bank, which we all agreed is the right one. So we set our own risk appetite, don't let the regulator do that for us, and then articulate why that's enough.
And from a reporting perspective, like a dashboarding perspective, is that consistent? Is it
What?
repeatable?
We do exactly the same. That's why I'm saying we, in the last 2-3 organisations, have built the company control framework. There's a process to look at the regulation and make sure that the framework's appropriate, but then we just measure our maturity against our own framework. Exactly. And it's the same with the clients. And there was lots of, I remember for the first time I did it, there was lots of pushback from some of the client-facing teams saying, oh, but we have to do this, we have to do that. I said, well, let me speak to them, let me explain to them. I spend a lot of my time speaking to the clients, and I've always found that when you have the conversation, they're not actually interested in standard X or standard Y. They want to know that their data's protected or that they've got controls in place. That's the bit that interests them.
Yep. And there are vendors who have made an entire industry out of this. You've got Drata and Vanta and all these other things whose job is to go test it once and then work out how many different regulations it actually gives you your answer to.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm conscious of time. I don't know how long we've gone through so far, but I was just about to suggest this becomes interactive. I'm conscious that we've got lots of talent in front of us that I'm ignoring right now. So I'm gonna keep quiet and please.
I might just throw one out there, which is, like it or not, we're all living in a tribal world. Okay, so it was an interesting comment that Aung made about investment banker and what they actually care about.
Yeah.
They're in the investment banking tribe. Their regulator is actually something different. Going back to your point about, will the CISO service, will we ever get it right? We've been getting it wrong for a while. I don't think we're ever going to get it right because the world is tribal. And if you think about it, the regulator of us guys, infrastructure professionals, is ultimately the ICO, right? Appointed by the government. They're given a certain amount of teeth to fine people if there's a breach. If there's a breach, they'll fine you X. The investment banker case, their regulator is a share price business which they're looking for. So the Barclays investment banker say, well, if I make this deal work, I'm going to do wonders for the Barclays share price. That's actually their regulator, and that's their tribe. They don't actually kill monkeys about what the ICO fine might be if there was a breach, because as Andy said, it's inevitable it's going to happen anyway. So that's somebody else's tribe. That's owned by a different tribe.
I'm so stealing that concept, by the way.
My point is, I'm just trying to, it's a tribal industries are working. We're in the information security data protection industry. That's what we do. Banks issue the data. Our industry is protected.
But if I might, I think part of that is our job, right? So if I can't explain to a board of financiers why it's important to maintain data security or information security, that's on me. So they employ me to care about the techie side of it. They don't want to know the latest thing we've done with a bash bunny or something. They care about, can I trade? Am I in the market? And if I'm not, when am I getting back in the market? So everything I talk about, I was talking to some people about this last night over breakfast. It's a huge part of my job is being a translator. It's taking that detailed techie stuff, it's dumbing it down into business speak, and it's getting boards of CEOs, financiers, bankers to understand why it is that I'm doing things. And you're right, in investment banking, security is not a differentiator. It's not a competitive edge. No one's going to bark with Barclays over Goldman's because we've got a better IT security. They're going to come for rates or customer service or whatever else. So it's like an assumed capability. So it's good until it goes wrong, and then they're going to have a problem. So why should they spend money on it? Why should they care? I think a huge part of the CISO role is to take them through that journey. And luckily in financial world, the prudential regulators actually have cybersecurity as part of their prudential regulation. So the SEC, the New York Fed, the PRA, the FCA, all have a cybersecurity schedule within their regulations. So the front office guys in investment banking don't just look at ICO. They look at their own regulators who are financial regulators and see that they've got cybersecurity as well. So I'm kind of lucky on that front because it is a thing they are aware of. But they 100% look to me to deliver it. They don't care in terms of the day-to-day.
It's just a question of 10,000 Barclays customers have their details stolen. Does the ICO get a look in?
Yeah, but so do all the others. And you know, so there are huge fines levied for information security practices that are not just personally identifiable data. So one of the big regulations in banking is the surveillance of trading. So if you get to a point where somebody says, that's not what I wanted to buy £1 million worth of, you have to be able to take that back to who said what to whom and what did they buy. And there were a couple of companies who were conducting those conversations over things like WhatsApp and non-recorded lines, non-surveilled technology. And the regulators take a very dim view of that. And JP Morgan, I think, picked up a $650 million fine. Yeah. So, you know, 2/3 of $1 billion.
Well, I think actually on the back of that, I think NatWest have just implemented controls around social media messaging within theirs, and because the FCA are now looking into this as
every other bank in
this
the
is the
industry
next thing.
went,
Yep.
God, are we doing that? Let's go and
Yeah.
find out.
Yeah.
Guys
Well,
are doing
they all
that.
said we are doing that as well. We need
Yeah.
to do something
Oh,
about
God.
it.
Yeah, what are we going to do? So we spent a huge amount of effort in working out what are all the communication channels that can exist,
Yep.
and it's not just things like WhatsApp. Bloomberg has a messenger. Everything's got its own. Reuters has its own. So it's how you control that. Where do you put your DLP controls? And so then you get into data, but it's not necessarily PII in the sense of DORA or GDPR.
Yeah, that's good. All right, so please.
Have you found a change in impact though since SolarWinds? Since that case has gone to the US, like we've seen an impact that cybersecurity CISOs are taking cybersecurity to the board, and they have a larger voice at the table, right? And that's happened in other parts of the world, I've noticed.
Yeah.
How about
For me, I don't think
Architectural, I think.
SolarWinds is the one that's defined it. I think
Yeah.
SolarWinds is part of a bigger issue that's kind of brought it to it. And I think the regulator, it is one of their top risks. Now the PRA is on us, and I know it's around operational resilience, but that feeds into the security element. And I think things like SolarWinds, the Colonial Pipeline, despite not being financial services and Colonial, these kind of critical national infrastructure takedowns, it's definitely bringing it to the board's attention. The board, for me, the board and the executive team, they know security is a top risk and they know it's important, but they don't understand what we need to do. And then that's my job and my team's job to be able to translate, as Andy said,
shift, isn't it, really?
into it. So there's an appreciation that now cyber is, we need to invest in it. I think there's definitely been a switch in mindset of that cyber is becoming a return on investment, not just a cost burden.
So enabler, basically.
Absolutely. And so I think that's our job to kind of translate it and to sell that to the business. One of the things that I always say to the board, and they seem to understand it, is that I see security as the wiring loom of a car. Like if you embed us at the very beginning and put the wiring loom into the chassis and then apply everything on top, which is the business operations, it's gonna work. But if you build the business and then try and add the wiring loom in after, it's either going to be hanging out, it's going to be, the cables are going to snap, it's not going to work, it's going to look ugly. And so if we shift that mindset and actually put security at the forefront and lay the foundations at the outset on everything, it's far more cost effective. It becomes an enabler, and we have less resistance.
So picking up on that, we all, with the exception of, I think you might be one of the lucky few who's in a relatively new company, so don't have too much IT archaeology.
Yep.
But with all of the regulations that you have to deal with, and with all of the time concocting requirements, how do you find a carrot to buy time from your IT resources? Because you're not really doing the fixing or the compliance part, you're more about it and giving guidance. And B, how do you demystify that with all of the conflicting requirements, not just security, but also technology and business requirements in terms of delivery of these teams that you don't actually define?
I think that's where the really good stakeholder management comes in, because as you say, you can set the rules, you can set the guidelines, but you don't, generally the security team doesn't deliver this because that sits in the IT space, in the operational space. So having that stakeholder management, but also really being able to tell the story to those stakeholders as what is the most important thing, because it's easy to go to them and say, we have, 500 pen test findings, 10,000 patches to be applied, we have these audit findings, these risks, kind of tying it together and really giving them a very clear story of the structure of what they need to do and what that gives them and what they gain. But then what we found is reporting on this regularly, having these really, really regular, and we've gone to, for our key risks, for our most important areas, we communicate that weekly to allow that continuous engagement and continuous progress. And you'll actually find, if you get at a director level the buy-in, that really helps then driving down the operational teams, because often they have very conflicting, and patching and keeping your environment running are often seen as being in conflict. Try to tell the story that this maybe not, but how many times have you had somebody turn down a patch because, this means I'm going to have to turn off, I have to.
How much of a challenge do you think?
Yeah, it's like.
Yeah.
So
If I can just comment on that, I think some of it you do have to sort of look at yourselves a bit as well as a security team, and this might be a bit of a bitter pill for us to swallow, but we do have occasionally in my organisation really brilliant security consultants who can look at an architecture and they can find every single weakness within it. My challenge sometimes is in reining that in a little bit and putting the commercial realities of the bank across the top of that. So yes, I would love to have that perfect ideal state architecture. The reality is it's going to cost me 30 million quid to get there, and it's not going to make the bank 30 million quid. So what's the best I can achieve but still be profitable? And that's often quite difficult for the more sort of binary thinkers of the world to get their head around. Like, what we're doing is an incremental improvement on where we are today. I might be getting rid of some tech debt, so I'm getting some newer stuff, but it's not architected ideally, but it's still better than what I've got. And sometimes it's quite hard to get people across that journey of, no, it's not perfect, but it's good enough to get going. And it takes a lot sometimes to have those conversations.
I think sometimes that wish to get it perfect and only coming out with a solution when it's 100% there is really hindering us because...
So just sort of bringing it back to the question about solar winds, I completely agree. You have to be pragmatic. Maybe it's the Kenny Scott, maybe. It doesn't have to be gold standard. It doesn't have to be banking standard. It has to be fit for purpose. It has to meet the risk appetite. But I've always got my little list of things I'd like to have. If money was no object, what would I do? And then when an incident happens, never waste a good incident. That's when I'll go, hey, look, you know what we need to do to manage that? Here's my next thing on my list I want to do. And if it's the right time and you present it correctly, then you get the funding and you make that incremental improvement.
No, I agree, and I think just turning it into pound notes, that's one way to get it across. We've had a number of projects where I've been in conflict with my CTO because it's like, well, that's not our priority, and it's like, okay, that may not be our priority, but it is the bank's priority. And actually, one of the ways that I got around it was that I built a picture diagram of a road that routed off, and I put, this is, if we go down this route, this is what it's going to look like, and if we go down your route, this is what you could look like. And it's up to you, ultimately. It's your tech stack. I can only advise you on what we should be doing, and if that's recorded and you are happy to put into the minutes that actually, no, that's too much of a cost to us, that's not a risk to us, and then something pops, you're the one talking to the regulator, not me.
So risk ownership, identification, who owns the risk, not the CISO, right?
Yeah. Some cases. It depends. I think we often have a veto.
Sorry. I think we have one. Sorry.
So I have a question if each of you could answer quickly. I am curious because every business has an objective, ultimately revenue, right? So when looking at each of your businesses, right, telco, financial, what do you look at in prioritizing what you are going to, like each year? What are your top?
From a security perspective.
Aligning with business objectives, right?
Yeah, so for me it's resilience. So it's not about having that perfect architecture and that perfect environment, because I don't think there is such a thing. It's a dynamically changing environment, and so for me it's resilience. It's about, we are going to be compromised one time, that's inevitable. It's about how we respond to it and how quickly we can deal with it and recover. And so it's ensuring resilience, and that ultimately the customer, because the regulator doesn't care about it's going to cost us money. The regulator cares about the customer's not going to lose access to their accounts. And so we need to ensure resilience. And so from a security perspective in finance, that's ultimately what we need to ensure.
I think we had a question from yourself.
So just a quick one. This goes back to your initial question, and you so eloquently put around first bit around meeting those business objectives and the piece around NIST and the ability to identify, protect, detect, and respond, that kind of thing. So from a board perspective, and I'm starting to hear it more and more as I go to these events, especially around resilience as well. What you know, when we talk about what does success look like to us, from a board perspective, is that message? Are we giving that message? Are we making the board more aware of what success really should be like from a security perspective? I mean, from my perspective, it's a combination of both. It is but our role is to be the enablers to help them to achieve their objectives, right? But at the end of the day, we're also there to respond to those breaches now, rather than just identify that prevention. So I've always been along the lines: if you can't detect, if you can't prevent, you must detect, and then respond and the whole resilience. I'm starting to see that more and more because, you know, when I speak to people, they don't always have that resilient perspective.
Yep.
And then
It's proportionality as well, I think.
And their perspective on resilience can be different things. It's, oh, we're backing up, but are you backing up immutably? And okay, you're backing up immutably, but what's your
What do you actually need?
But
are you restoring the value back?
And I'm very conscious
Sorry
of
to talk over you, but does the board care, right?
Yeah.
In my world, they don't, right? I'll be really, it's a bit, again, one of my more controversial statements. The boards don't care about security for security's sake.
Yeah.
They care about, will my business continue to operate? Can I still sell revenue? Can I still print, you know? And if they can't, then they want to know why not. And they don't care that the backup's immutable. They don't care, you know, they care about we'll be back within 20 minutes so I can carry on trading. So when I have my, so in Barclays, we've got lots of different boards. We've got regional boards, we've got legal entity boards, we've got business unit boards. So I go to a bunch of these different things. And uniformly, the conversation is around enablement of business and what will happen if, and that's it. They don't, you know, so it's competitive edge, it's risk management, and that's it. Whether it's financial risk management, reputational risk management, security risk management, that's all they care about. So,
but I think my addition to that is it's not going to be the same across
no,
all
everyone's
industries. It's basically proportionate to
what you do
you're working
find
with.
is the things that are hitting the press suddenly become an issue to them. So I've got this teeny little board in the US who just do one very small legal entity, and one of them started asking me about red teaming. And I was like, well, where have you heard that from? It must have been something in the press.
CCA.
And then I had to spend like an hour explaining what a red team was, and they didn't get it, thought it was a tabletop exercise. And all of a sudden you're off down a rabbit hole, and actually you bring them back to, well, why are you asking me this? What are you caring about? I just want to know we're safe. All right, cool, I've got that, I'll show you. So yeah, it's interesting where you go.
I think that's the most important question. Why?
Yeah.
Because they bring stuff to you all the time. The chairman go to me, oh, the 40 manager vulnerability. Are we vulnerable? Why do you care about like there's so much more out there. Elements, but they bring these questions because they'll see something in the press and be like, that's an issue, and it's like why? And then they have to stop, think, and actually answer the why, and then we can drill down and actually have a proper conversation.
So you know you're at a board meeting and they quite rightly might say to you, what is success for you this year, or for what does that mean to us as a business, as an organisation?
For me, it's not about success for me, it's about success for the business. So it's about actually looking at where we are, looking at what we've done over the last 12, 24 months, and what's that journey, and I hate the word the journey, but what journey are we looking at? So for example, we'll do a ransomware simulation, and there'll be lessons learned, and it's about applying those lessons learned to the next time, and then the next time we do that simulation, we've reduced the mean time to detect and respond by 30%. That's what success looks like.
So I'm conscious that I need to draw this to a close.
I think there was a question at the...
Is it minute? Okay, that's not bad. That's not bad.
Yeah, I think there's a question at the back, James.
Oh, sorry.
So
I missed that
I
one.
totally agree, and I think you actually hit on my point now. I was going to say, which is the why.
Yeah.
For me, it's always the
Yes.
why. Was the one thing I get challenged
Agree.
at more than anything else when I go to board or senior leadership anywhere. Is always the why.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? What does that do for the company? And then I always bring it back to the CIA triad, obviously, right back to basics of security and the availability bit. That's really the thing that they're all over is what's the availability? How can you protect my availability of my systems so that from a hotel company, so actually hotels and resorts, we can still make money and we can still serve guests and all that sort of stuff, check people in and out, etc. So always back to the why.
Right, so in case anyone didn't notice that, I've been told I need to draw this to a close, and there's a question I wanted to ask, and I haven't been able to, but we'll come back to it because it's quite a complex one. But anyway, thank you so much for your input. That's been really quite useful, and hopefully people have perhaps picked up on things which are important to their industries, etc., businesses. Thank you to the panel who've done all the hard work. I've just sort of stood here and hummed. So yeah, thanks all.
Thanks everyone.